This is, a topic I'm deeply passionate about, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you about it. Couple of points of logistics. First of all, as you can see, I am remote. I am, like a droid on the front of the stage. Despite the virtual hybrid format, a little bit interactive. So there are going to be places also where I'm going to be asking you questions and giving you sort of time and space to think about them. Great thing to, sort of sit and think about with your, with your co-founders for a minute or two. I'll queue these up and give the explanations as we go. If you're watching this on video later, like after Crypto Startup School, when it's posted, that's a great moment to pause the video, think to yourself, maybe talk to your co-founder or friend, and then come back and watch the review and discussion. All right, cool. So what is intellectually fascinating to me about Web3 business, like the thing that first intrigued me about studying Web3 as a research topic and field, and what makes it sort of different and very sort of like unusual relative to other tech business, is that every Web3 business, virtually, there are exceptions, but they're the exceptions that prove the rule. Web3 businesses have fundamental intellectual challenges at their core in addition to technical challenges, right? Like a lot of technology business historically has been about, solving some very difficult engineering challenge or figuring out how to make a bunch of different components, sort of work together technically. And all of that carries over. We have all of those challenges in Web3. But on top of that, we have incentive design, right? So much of Web3 is about balancing incentives between various participants in your ecosystem, between the platform and your users and your developers and contributors and all these different players in one fashion or another, whether you're an infrastructure layer or a consumer app, that you have to sort of build the technology with incentives in mind. And that means you have to think really hard about the incentives as well, right? You have to sort of like, be a little bit of a game theorist, or like you sort of bring this like these strategic questions to the Web3 exercise on top of just solving the technical problem. And of course, in startups, which are, you're constantly racked with uncertainty, this adds a whole new layer, right? Like it's an additional thing you have to get right. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is like, how do you align incentives for value creation? And then and in parallel, how do you build your business in a way that enables value capture, that like you don't just create a lot of value and not be able to internalize any of it yourself and keep going. And this, I think, will tie in very nicely, when you guys are thinking about this pricing session coming up, right? Like, pricing is a core economic primitive. We'll talk about it some also this afternoon with auctions. That's about value creation, sort of balancing value creation and value internalized by your participants with the value you capture as the platform. I guess standard disclaimer whenever you're talking about business strategy, right? These questions are often things that feel like they're reasonably simple and often, at least to, at a first pass, intuitive, but they can be like really subtle and they can be really high stakes. So seemingly similar business models, and you've probably all felt this with like two different projects launch the same token model and it works really well in one and it doesn't work in the other, right? Like seemingly similar models can have very different success levels, as a function of the rest of the aspects of the business, what the market context is and so forth. But okay, so one more piece of wind up, and then we'll start getting a little more granular. Like, what are we doing today? I'm going to like talk you through frameworks for thinking about value creation and value capture in Web3. And the two sort of key watchwords or watch topics, I guess. One of them is about what's called sustainable competitive advantage. And this is actually going to be the focus of the second half of the session. Competitive advantage is how you manage to maintain differentiation in competitive space, how you manage to outperform competitors and other platforms. And again, sustainable means you can do it not just at the beginning, but like over time, you can maintain competitive advantage or hopefully push it even further, right? Sort of accelerate your lead. And we'll talk a lot about what is, sort of what carries over from Web 2, where the old intuitions are still useful and what some of those core intuitions were, and like where things change in Web 3. Like what is it that is new or different? So for example, when we talk about competitive advantage, we'll of course talk about the possibility of vampire attacks, right? When all of your data lives on a, big public infrastructure layer, it's easy for other people to see what your data is and potentially target your top customers and incentivize them to switch over to their product. And that's very different relative to Web 2, where everything was about aggregating, sort of like the biggest data, or, one major business model was about aggregating the biggest data moat you possibly could. Key footnote, all of this is still evolving, right? We're in early days. I'm going to be teaching sort of how what we know about Web 2 strategy feeds into and transforms in the context of Web 3 strategy. And there's lots more to be discovered, right? Like this is morphing as what Web 3 is morphing, and new business models are being discovered. So my strong prior is that this is going to like help all of you guys figure out how to compete in this landscape. And 5 years from now, we will have like built and stacked much more on top of it. And so as you're like, this is as much an exercise in learning how to think about these types of business strategy questions as the individual, like, specific like tactical suggestions are going to be relevant, right? So it's not just about like tactics, do this, there'll be a lot of that, but it's also about like, how do we get to that tactical decision and how do we sort of extrapolate the same type of reasoning to as yet unknown settings? So why are we doing this? Why do we do Web3 at all? There are lots of good answers to that question. The one that I particularly like, I'm slightly biased, Jad Esper, one of my former students who now runs Kudos, and I wrote an article about this, so I'm biased because we wrote it down, but we thought really hard about it. And to me, like, it's fundamentally about a difference in the way we create value. So Web3 is about giving up some share of surplus, the value that is created by a business at the outset. You give up some share of the value, you give, some degree of governance or some degree of ownership or some degree of the returns to, or even just, useful assets, right? You give away a lot of tokens to your arcade on day zero to the builder, the creator, the platform user. And you're sort of making this bet that when you do that, those people, those agents, those companies are going to invest and grow the platform, grow the pie for everyone. So it's like you're saying, I'm going to give up some value today, and I'm going to sort of share value going forward, right? I'm about trying to share the total value that this creates. And the hope is that giving someone ownership and some degree of shared participation is going to drive them to like build the brand, to build the product, to like, develop additional add-ons, features and whatever else. And the reason, to me at least, this framing of the problem is important is it makes it clear that sort of the sharing of ownership is not accidental. And the format matters, right? Like what you need to do somehow is provide value in a way that drives people to help make that pie bigger than whatever it would have been if you hadn't been sharing. And it creates this possibility that we might have like, Web3 social media platforms that are far more valuable than the Web 2, like, social media giants, and Web3 marketplaces that are far more valuable than the Web 2 marketplace giants. But that comes, and if you make the pie big enough, the fact that you've given up some slices of it, you can still accrue more value for yourself in the end. But it's not just like, it's not just about sharing value for the sake of sharing value. That's good, right? Like it's also, by the way, it's good from a like positive like social welfare standpoint. You'd like to be sharing value with your participants, and you'd like to have your participants in the platform sort of have a sort of shared outcomes. But from an instrumental standpoint, that's because of shared incentives. right? It aligns the platform and the user, both for the user to contribute to the platform and for the platform to make decisions in ways that reflect the user and their preferences as well. Okay, now I've been using this word platform all the time, and I've essentially been saying like, Web3 business, I've been treating Web3 business and platform as interchangeable. And that's not an accident either. So actually, let me pause for 1 second. So just on that framing point, any questions, thoughts, reflections?
So this, first of all, thank you for being here. This principle was what got me most excited by crypto in the first place. I guess it seems though it's quite, in my opinion, at tension with regulatory considerations. So I'd love to hear how you think about that potentially later.
Absolutely, and I am not I'm not a regulatory expert, so I'm not going to speak to specific structure or policy or whatever. But at a high level, I think it's important to think about it. There are many ways to share value and align incentives, right? For example, my instance of arcade tokens that I just sort of used as a throwaway, like giving people, sort of the opportunity to play your game as your game expands and help build the game universe as a way of sharing value and aligning incentives. Giving people the opportunity to have characters in your story world, write fiction under in their own in their own voice, but about a character who's sort of semi-permeably sort of passes into the canon of the actual story world. This happened, by the way, there are precedents for that. I don't know if any of you read the Star Wars Expanded Universe, but growing up, I read all of these Star Wars novels that were basically written by people who had been invited to use characters from sort of obscure parts of the canon and write stories around them, right? And those authors did super well, right? And especially the ones who wrote really, really good characters and stories. Some of that material actually even got imported back into the main Star Wars franchise. These sorts of shared ownership and shared involvement, sort of don't, they don't look like the types of things that are alignment through direct, sort of direct financial return or something that a lot of the regulatory concern, again, to my understanding, is about. And I think, in some sense, actually, this is a really good explanation of why this principle is important, right? If the goal is to find ways of taking your community members and your users or your developers and giving them a component of the pie, platform by platform, we'll come to that platform word in a second. There are different shapes of what that pie slice can be, and even sort of in today's architecture and today's sort of frameworks, I think there are a lot of ways to do it that don't look like things that are sort of, again, to my understanding, at the boundaries of the regulatory concerns. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, on to platforms. So as I said, I've been using this platform and Web3 business almost interchangeably. That's not an accident. What is a platform? A platform is just, sort of, something that enables groups of users to interact with each other. This is an extremely high level definition. Note that I have not said things like must have, two sides. There's a buy side and a sell side, although often platforms will. I haven't said anything about what technology they run on, a credit card or a newspaper is a platform, right? A credit card is a platform that enables customers to transact with merchants. A newspaper is a platform that enables advertisers to reach readers. Weirdly, newspapers and search engines are similar businesses in that sense. Platforms are characterized by network effects. So a network effect is that, sort of driven by, or it's when you have an increase in the number of users impacting the value of the good or service provided. And again, these could be positive or negative. So in the case of credit cards, the more businesses take a credit card, the more valuable it is for a user to have that credit card. The more users have a credit card, the more valuable it is for a business to take the credit card. But with newspapers and maybe search advertisers as well, the more users, the more valuable it is for the advertisers. It's a positive network effect in one direction, and the more advertisers, perhaps the more frustrating it is for users, negative network effect in the other direction. And also, by the way, network effects act on the same side too. So If there are many advertisers on a newspaper or a search platform, that raises the price for every individual advertiser. So they actually have a negative network effect relative to each other. You probably all know this, but so apologies. I'm gonna, because you're all in some sense platform entrepreneurs. So I'm going to speed through some of these basic sort of concepts and stuff, but stop me if there's anything that feels like we should drill down on it. As I said, I've been using these interchangeably. That's because most crypto products are platforms. We don't always like intuitively think of them that way. So for example, Bitcoin, I claim, is a platform. Why is Bitcoin a platform? Well, sort of the same reason that a credit card is a platform, right? It's a mechanism for people to interact in transactions with each other. And it's sort of only gain, not only does it grow in value as the number of people who use it, who believe that Bitcoin exists and is meaningful and perhaps use it for transactions increases, it sort of only has value when a lot of people agree that it has value, right? Like it's like the most primordial network effect you could have. These bits don't actually mean anything unless a reasonably sized group of people agrees that they do. Similarly, like the Bored Ape Yacht Club or like any NFT project is also a platform. Also, apologies, you'll see there'll be NFT pictures throughout all of my slides. I'm really too obsessed with them, but I like platforms. NFT projects are platforms, right? If only one person is in the project, it has no value. As the project, it might have value as like that person owns this very unique piece of art or imagery or whatever, but the real value comes when lots of people are excited about it, and especially when like really particularly interesting people become excited about it, right? Once you have Eminem and Snoop Dogg in the Bored Ape Yacht Club, then you can have them perform at Ape Fest and do a music video set in the other side. And so again, there are these positive network effects among participants, right? The more and there can be like sort of escape velocity level network effects, right? You can reach a point when there's constrained supply, as there is in many NFT projects, where far more people want to join the platform than there actually is space for users. And again, this doesn't just have to be about like fixed supply for an NFT market. It could just be that like your servers get overtaxed, right? You could have sort of a negative platform externality at largest scales simply because there's not enough space to run everyone at once. So Web3 platforms are going to face many of the same conceptual challenges we were used to with the Web2 platforms, but there's a lot of new stuff that creates new opportunities and also sometimes some new challenges. So this is incredible oversimplification, but in my mind, there are sort of three big categories here. One of them is standardized infrastructure. So the fact that this stuff runs on blockchains is important, not just for the sake of decentralization, which is good for security and so forth, which is sort of that third one, credible commitments. But standardization is useful because it means lots of people can build, right? If you launch, a new protocol, because the infrastructure is standardized, it's easy for everybody else to like reference and interact with your protocol. And then, on top of that, bullet point 2, it interoperates and composes, right? It's easy for people to like build new protocols on top of it. It's easy for them to import them into their platforms. Same thing if you have like, a given digital token that's can be immediately displayed in lots of different token viewing applications. And it's the standardization that does that. If you think about like how hard it is, if you wanted to say, take all of your data from Twitter and move it to Facebook or vice versa, right? Like these are platforms with very similar structure, very similar use cases, and yet porting data back and forth is almost impossible, right? It's just like different format, different inputs, very, very hard to like make them work together. Whereas crypto by design, everything lives on this substrate, the blockchain, and the blockchain sort of standardizes everything. And that enables it to become very interoperable and composable. And then there's also this trust point, credible commitments. So if you as a platform want to say to all of your users, like we commit to not raise price, It's really hard to do that in Web 2, right? You can't just sort of say like, hey, we're committing like the price is always going to be this, or the reward scheme is always going to be this, or like these points will never get devalued. When you can put it in a smart contract, you absolutely can. Similarly, if you decentralize control enough, you absolutely can, right? If you say, we want the reward scheme to look like this unless our consumers don't like that, and then you give the consumers like, 65% governance, now you have commitment. And commitment is good because it means people can trust that your platform is going to behave as promised, which makes them more interested in joining and potentially more interested in building on top of it. And so again, like in my mind, like all of this is about breaking down the sort of the components. Like we know we like credible commitments, right? We like smart contracts, we like trust, we like being able to commit to things. The question is, what does that mean for your business, right? It's if people will trust your promises, how does that enable you to do things you couldn't do before? What types of users does that bring in? Like what is the value as the platform of being able to make those types of commitments, of being able to use this infrastructure to make the incentives better and more aligned? All right, so network effects. The standard network effects analysis, you care about three different things. You want the strength, the valence, and the source. So strength is like just how much does adding a new person to the platform, new user to the platform, grow the value for everybody? And how much does that vary across users, right? Are there what we call marquee users, people who if you bring them in, like suddenly the value goes way up? And how quickly do these things grow, right? Like, where are your thresholds? Like, do you need to get 100 users for the thing to become awesome? Do you need 1,000 users for it to become more awesome? Do you need like, 1 billion users? That one might take a longer time to aggregate. And then as we already talked about, sometimes these network effects are positive, sometimes they're negative. You got to think about their valence, like, and for which users, right? Like with a lot of, there are a lot of cases where some users generate a lot of value for everybody else, but they themselves might be unhappy. They're going to get mobbed, right? It's like you just added some celebrity to your platform. Maybe they're a little bit reclusive, but everyone's like, oh my gosh, celebrity, like let's hang out. Like, and then source is really, so strength and valence we think about a lot, right? Those are sort of like the default instincts about like what we have to care about, but source is also very important. And the key here is to think about, is this source defensible? Right? Like liquidity, right? If you're a DeFi protocol, is liquidity defensible? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And sometimes you make platform decisions that affect that, right? If your liquidity providers have to be locked in for a year, that's a lot more defensible than if your liquidity providers can just pick up their liquidity and move to a platform with a slightly better rate of return at any moment. But on the other hand, if you lock people in, maybe they're going to be less willing to use your platform. And so you have this like balance. A lot of the TLDR is that a lot of the defensible sources in Web 2 are a lot less defensible in Web 3, right? Like a lot of Web 2 was about data and user aggregation. And as we've already seen, think about the competition between various NFT trading platforms or DeFi protocols, right? User aggregation is not nearly as defensible, at least so far in Web 3, because people can just switch. Right? When an individual user controls their digital assets, it's easier for them to move. Similarly, data aggregation, right? If all the data lives on a public chain, maybe it's harder for that to be a source of defensible competitive advantage. Although maybe you have know-how and tooling built on top of that data that is much more defensible. So there we go. Just quickly, I think we have time. Quickly, just like to give yourself some examples of like how to do this analysis. I'm going to show this one, and then we're going to do a live discussion example in a few moments that's sort of similar in style, but with a second design question. So, social media platforms, one big difference is like, are your network effects global versus local? Social media platforms, they're global. They're like everywhere. If you add a user somewhere, they're valuable everywhere, except maybe like by language silo or something. Rideshare is very local. Right? Like having a bunch of drivers in a location is only valuable like for that location. And there's a little bit of global, like, if you're a user of a given rideshare platform and you fly somewhere else, maybe that's the app you open up on your phone. But like mostly these rely on very dense local networks. Valence, we already talked about users versus advertisers. Rideshare is a great example of this, like the cross-side complementarity, but same-side substitutability. So like every driver, it makes the platform more valuable for every rider and vice versa. But like riders crowd each other out, drivers crowd each other out. And again, I mean, like, think about liquidity, and we talked about vampire attacks in Web3. Like there was for a while cutthroat competition between Lyft and Uber where they were both trying to steal each other's drivers, right? Trying to like extract the liquidity from the platform. We'll say more about NFT projects later, but they have they and many other Web3 businesses actually have a source of network effect that is to some degree, I think, unique to the Web3 or Web3-like businesses, which is community cohesion, which is sort of like an active desire among users to use this platform instead of a competitor for whatever reason, right? Like, you are part of this NFT project. You're part of the community. You are a user on this platform, and you self-identify not just as somebody who participates in who writes manga, but is part of this manga community, or somebody who isn't just like a an open source developer, but an open source developer for this protocol. And that's a type of network effect that is very different and special. And a lot of this like token incentive alignment stuff is about cultivating that. Okay, launching a platform, chicken and egg. So how many of you guys have heard like somebody say like, if you're like launching a two-sided platform, like you got to start by going after supply, or you got to start by going after demand, or something like this? Yeah, so this is like a very common way in which people advise this question. And people have very strong opinions about it, right? They sort of say like, oh my gosh, you absolutely must get all of your supply side first. And by the way, in the context of an individual platform, like if they're talking to you about your product specifically, this might be the right way to think about it, right? Like supply or demand might be the first one to try to attract. But like at a high level, like a lot of people just think that they're always one of these is the hard thing, right? Like, or the most essential thing or something. And that is not the way to think about it. The reason is that like whether supply or demand is the way you start building your platform, even if you're, it's even just imagining your platform is two-sided, which it isn't even necessarily, depends tremendously on your market context and the specific problem you're trying to solve. What you really want to think about is who do you subsidize versus who do you charge? And this again will factor into the pricing conversation you guys are going to have later as well. But basically, some users of your platform are going to be, are themselves going to be generating so much value for the other users that you're in effect willing to subsidize them, right? So like if you have users who are really price sensitive or really quality sensitive or marquee, right? Like they're just going to bring in a ton of other people. You're actually like often willing to pay, at least at the outset, to get them to come in, right? Like, you'd be willing to, and you see this all the time, right? Like, you might give away like early token allocations to early adopters or developers. An NFT community might give out, some of their tokens to people who like, to strategic partners who are like helping build, sort of associated assets or something of the sort. And the reason for that is these users are going to add a lot of value for everybody else. On the margin, you want to be subsidizing the users who add the greatest marginal value for others, and meanwhile charging the people who like perceive significant platform value and preferably have the less elastic demand. So they're less price sensitive, less quality sensitive. They really want this thing, whatever it is. And note that changes, who that is might change over time, right? Like someone who's a marquee user of the platform might always be a marquee user, but alternatively, they might like, go from being marquee to being like, sort of the platform grows enough that they're actually getting more value out of the thing than they're providing down, sort of to users. And at that point, maybe they charge, maybe you charge them rather. And so it's less about, sort of, do you start with your chicken or egg? Do you start with your supply side or your demand side or whatever? And more, it's like, you need your initial users to be the ones who spin that network effect, sort of into existence very quickly and make it really strong. right? Who like have a really high positive valence network effect. And ideally, their engagement becomes defensible. So I've got 3 contexts for you. Think like an L2 chain, an NFT project, and a DeFi trading platform. And the question is, who do you subsidize and who do you charge? Like, how would you characterize the users that you're going to want to be subsidizing? How do you characterize the users that you're on the margin going to want to be charging? Think to yourself for 20 seconds, then talk to a neighbor for like a minute or so, minute and a half, and then we'll come back and collect some answers. So like a couple groups, like be ready to like jump up and like say your thoughts at the mic. Cool? All right. What do we think?
Do I just go through the first example of the subsidies?
Yeah, why don't you give your thoughts on the first row? Exactly.
Okay, so the first row, if you're an L2 chain, you might subsidize like big marquee devs or builders in the community via a grant program or something. Charge via network fees, so future projects that are looking to build on your chain, you could charge them. Pricing, I think that bucket would just be like network fees and protocol fees, gas fees, things like that.
I love it. There is, in fact, a copy of the slide with my thoughts on it as the answers to Flash. That's basically what it says, except phrased way better. So I'm going to call that one like a straight victory on L2. And exactly right? You want to subsidize your early marquee users, and get them to start the ecosystem and spin it up. And then like over time, you're going to be charging. Eventually, you're going to be charging probably everyone, right? Because at some point if you're lucky, get to a large enough scale that like everyone just wants to be on your chain, and you're going to charge them in proportion to how much they're using the system, right? Gas fees, some like measurement of usage, because that's actually the cost structure, right? Cost scales with utilization. Love it. Even got that pricing point, which we hadn't even talked about yet. Nailed it. All right, NFT project, what do we think?
So for NFT project, the subsidization would be for, so I actually, along with my co-founders, we launched an NFT project ourselves. And
awesome.
So we subsidized members of other communities, NFT project communities, by saying, okay, we'll have an allocation of 5 NFTs that will go into your community, that you can kind of raffle off to members, with the idea being that if we can kind of get other communities excited about our project, eventually we'll be able to charge the normal price of other members. Similarly, the idea of a pre-sale, you actually subsidize the generalized cost as well, where you invite people that are close and kind of either influential. We've also did one-of-ones, and kind of airdrop them directly to people that we believed would be pivotal or important to helping to show the values of the projects, but also evangelize the project as well. So yeah, the generalized charging is just kind of once the public launch went live and we were confident that, okay, now there's enough excitement and a lot of perception of value, through which a lot of people come in and I guess FOMO in, you could say, or just buy because they're excited.
They're not FOMOing. They realize they want to be in the community because you have such a cool initial community.
Right, yeah, that I think is the point. And then maybe at the 50% mark, perhaps that's where the FOMO layer kicks in.
You don't want to miss out on being in the awesome community either, right?
Exactly. So that's well said. And then for pricing, I think in a lot of ways you look at some of the existing market dynamics. But one thing I would say is the way that we conceived it is, okay, for the generalized audience that we're looking at, what would be what would they spend on an annual subscription, or what is a meaningful amount where it's valuable to them, but it's within the range of a financial purchase and decision that they can make, for the audience that we were really catering to. Love it.
Let me stick with you for one more second. Let me ask the question about that audience and those initial communities. How did you pick them? What was the concept behind which communities you were going to partner with?
So the project that we had specifically was an NFT project that was targeted towards African and Latin American communities. So I think in a lot of ways we looked for other African communities, we looked for other Latin American communities, we looked for groups of like women, we looked for
Super
people
cool.
that really engage with us, like other larger NFT projects that really, for lack of a better term, like they really vibed with what we were doing and expressed that. So it was just a matter of like, we weren't guessing. It was just like who actually engaged with us and wants to really be a part of this.
Yeah.
That we then reached out to and invited to participate in our launch.
I love it. We're 2 for 2 now with the like walk-off home runs, you know, all 3 bases, including the one we hadn't even like talked about the structure for yet. It's exactly it, right? Like you're subsidizing, like who is it that you're recruiting in, that you're subsidizing, you're giving tokens to, or you're like, you know, really like, you know, marketing the community to. It's communities with, you know, similar goals and opportunities that are already established, and that where you can find people that you know are going to be great community contributors in yours. And then asking the question, like, you know, how do we leverage them to drive that initial value to then open it up and like bring in like, you know, sort of all the rest of the market, right? Other users, you know, sort of who have the opportunity to opt in. And again, it's like the better you do at like curating and calibrating that initial community, you know, the more, you know, sort of the more the network effect both exists and is strong, and also sort of draws in the right people, right? Like, you know, it's not FOMO, you know, it's not FOMO in the sense of like, oh man, I just got to get into this project and I have no idea what it is. It's like, oh, this is like a project for me that I want to be a part of because I want to be with these people. And that's exactly what it's about, right? It's like, you know, your ordinary members, you know, and pricing wise, right? Like, you know, the non-subsidized users, they pay more because, you know, they're following these other sort of core contributors in, and the hope is that at every layer you bring in, you select for the people who really want to be a part of it, you know, and price accordingly. And this also motivates, by the way, the idea of downstream, you know, like why is it that communities get airdrops? Why is it that they get reduced prices on future mints and community expansions and things? Well, it's the active core contributors who you want to like reinforce their activity, right? It's not an accident that like, you know, communities have lower pricing for their current active users relative to sort of new users joining. That's literally just like subsidizing the people who are already contributing to reinforce their incentive to contribute. Nailed it. Also, like, sounds like an incredible project. Cool. DeFi trading platform. Should we try, I don't know, the three-peat or something?
So I think subsidization, I think DeFi has very strong network effects. So subsidization early is like people providing supply, so maybe like liquidity providers that are bringing down slippage and fees and giving end users a good price. So charging is users who make use of the DeFi trading platform to, I don't know, swap. And then we had some disagreements about pricing because some people think maybe the pricing should go down as it sort of gets strong network effects. I suggested jokingly that maybe you should rent extract as much as you can while still being the cheapest, and make use of your network effects to extract as a platform. So I'm not sure about pricing.
I love it. You know, what do you, I guess we've like added an extra base because you covered both the pricing question that was sort of like the setup here and the one that we're talking about right after we come back from the break. So not only did you nail that like straight on every point, but like you even previewed where we're going. So rockin', exactly, right? You're subsidizing initial liquidity, you're charging your retail end user traders, and pricing, there is tension, right? On the one hand, you know, as the platform grows, liquidity becomes easier to come by, like the platform is sort of doing less to create value. On the other hand, as the liquidity is more anchored in this platform, now you can maybe extract, right? Your network effect is stronger. People like want to trade with you rather than some competitor. And so maybe you can push price up. Totally right. And indeed, the tension between those two, the question of like, do we have to like lower the price because, you know, our cost structure has gone down, Or can we raise the price because people are sort of coming to our platform organically now? That's totally going to depend on how defensible your competitive position is. And then, as I said, that is literally the second half of this session. So thank you. You rocked it. So we are almost at the break. Let me just quickly flash the pricing slide and reinforce what the three of you said. So price is linked to the value the platform adds, and it might change over time as a function of how much value you're adding. And its format depends like on the way that value works. Is it per transaction, like in the L2 or in the DeFi, sort of platform, where really the value you're adding accrues at the level of the individual transaction? Or is it like a membership fee? Is it like an annual, like, an NFT community or something, right? Like what's really going on is, the value comes from being in the organization. And so in that sense, maybe it makes sense to do a one-off or annual charge or something like that. But price level the platform can charge, that's sort of how you should think about what your price should be. Like, where does it come from? How do you even decide like how to price? But the level you can actually charge depends on your competitive advantage. And that is where we're going next. So there are examples. Here is my slide with my versions of it, which you will see looks very similar to what you guys said, but not nearly as eloquent. You guys really nailed it. I will probably be like in the future revising a version of this slide, and I should do like citation credit for you guys or something. But in the meantime, let's take a quick break because we've been going for, 50 minutes or so. So we can check out Pancho Sochi's beautiful NFT art. I've huge fan of his from the Subtext community. And there's a quick puzzle if anybody's looking for some some fun during the break. Which word doesn't belong and why? Your options are climbs, rustic, rabbit, youth, photo, two, and owl. All right. So as we ease back in, did anybody solve the puzzle? So if you drop rabbit, the first letter of all the words together spells crypto, and the last letter spells school. People are like, oh, come on, Scott, like what the heck? Like, so I've always loved this puzzle, this particular puzzle format. The first time I ever saw it, you have like a word pyramid or something, and you're staring at these words, and like they all feel totally different from each other, and like there's no meaningful relation between any of them. And you do all these things, right? You try number of consonants, you try, and that one was better designed than this one. If I'd really like done a good job at this, you try and like test it against lots of people to exclude as many of these different like alternate hypotheses as possible to make it even more confusing. But eventually you learn that like you can see out, you learn to see outside the frame of the puzzle, right? Like, the words themselves are not just individual objects, but can interact all together, which is sort of a metaphor for strategy, right? Seeing outside of the frame, and also a metaphor for Web3, seeing how a bunch of individual distinct pieces with their own properties, their own characteristics come together to form a unified whole. All right, so we are here to talk about competitive advantage. So what is competitive advantage? Competitive advantage fundamentally is your source of differentiation. And it's really important. These ideas go back to Michael Porter. It's really important to think about your differentiation, not in terms of features per se, but in terms of performance. It's like, my platform is better than the other platforms. And there is, at a high level, like only two ways you could be better, right? You can either be higher quality or lower cost. And so when you're thinking like, what is my source of differentiation? How am I competitively differentiated? It's like, how am I either going to be like, providing the thing at higher quality or providing the thing at lower cost, or both? These are measured in terms of value creation, and it's relative. It's a relative measurement. It's not just like, again, it's differentiation, right? It's not just like you are a high quality platform, but it's like, how much higher quality are you than your competitors? That means it can change, right? So like new competitors can show up, and or it can just get eroded in different fashions as the market changes. And so you need your competitive advantage to not just be, sort of real and high value, and large, but like also sustainable and defensible. many different places that platform competitive advantage can come from. So of course, perhaps most intuitively, platform competitive advantage can come from the core network effect, right? Like, if your platform has a really strong network effect, and we talked about this at the end of part one, you have liquidity, you have powerful users that other people want to interact with, you have data, all of these can be sources of competitive advantage because network effects, grow by definition. They grow as the number of users increases. And so if you manage to get your network effect far enough ahead of your competitors, that can be, going back up a sec, a source of differentiated performance. Also, economies of scale, thinking especially about that cost side, right? If you have a way of doing something with lower friction or with like higher insight, like some better way of doing whatever the sort of operation is, that is also often a key source of competitive advantage. And then, and especially relevant to Web3 and was historically relevant in the open source software movement, is embeddedness, right? If everyone's platform runs on your platform, like everyone is using your technology in some fashion as a core component, then once again, right, like your position remains very defensible and you are providing the value of sort of connectedness, right? Like everybody is running through you. And often that, by the way, feeds into these other components, right? The more embedded you are, often the stronger your network effect and vice versa. And the more embedded you are, often the more economies of scale, right? If like everyone's protocol is running on you, you can aggregate liquidity from everywhere, or you can collect data from everywhere and like build sort of the best version of your product you can. By the way, you've probably already figured out, just like in the first half, we're starting like pretty abstract and then we're going to go like, heavy specific. There are other sources of competitive advantage that sort of like these ones are all about sort of the core dynamic of being a platform, right? Like you have network effects, you have economies of scale driven by those network effects. You have embeddedness, like you become a part of many other platforms. And so other people are building on top of you. There are other things you can do to generate competitive advantage. And like some of these are very powerful and we forget about them. Like standalone value can be an extremely strong source of competitive advantage, right? Just the fact that like people want to join your platform, not because of the network effects, but because they want to use it, right? If your platform just does something useful that is hard for other people to do, if you have the best interface or the best features or something, in Web 2, a lot of companies basically launched by providing SaaS platforms to whichever side, like their subsidy to one side of the market was a SaaS platform, right? It was like a platform that that one side of the market could use to manage all of their contractors and suppliers or all of their apartments or whatever. And then suddenly, you've got a side that just doesn't want to leave, right? And suddenly now you can provide, all of your other services, to the other side of the market. You have this completely locked in, supply or demand side as appropriate because they're just using your platform and you do their standalone services really well. They would use it even just to manage their inventory, even if there were no users on the other side. Similarly, like technical advantages, particularly high quality partners, thinking about that cost, sort of dimension, low cost suppliers or the best devs or something like that often. And then sometimes, although as we'll see, perhaps maybe less in Web3, sometimes speed to market just becomes a competitive advantage or source of competitive advantage. Like you get to market faster, you become better branded, everyone thinks of you as real. And there are some powerful examples of that in Web3, right? See Bitcoin, right? If Bitcoin were preceded by a different, I guess, Nakamoto blockchain, that would probably be the one that was sort of centrally identified and branded as one of the core digital assets. Okay, so these are many, many different sources of competitive advantage. Actually, quick, this is a good place to pause. And any questions about this? I just sort of zoomed through both sort of platform intrinsic competitive advantage and then sort of additional features that I guess in principle any tech platform or any tech product could have, and that platforms very much sort of also borrow from.
One question as it relates to subsidizing again.
Yeah.
And charging in terms of sequencing, some of these sources of competitive advantage look like more controllable? Like if you build a better product, a better team,
Yes.
should you go for this first and then from there work out who you can charge and who you can subsidize versus kickstarting a network that may not have these embedded?
Oh, it's such a great question. Yeah, so the question is, let me say it back and confirm that I've got it right, because it's really a deep and rich question. But at a high level, it's like some sources of competitive advantage, like building really good standalone value, are things that you can just build, right? You have a lot of control, conditional on your team being awesome, which all of you guys are, like of the ability to deliver high quality standalone value for your users. Whereas things like the size of your network or like the quality of, or economies of scale, for goodness sake, don't kick in until the market gets very, potentially until the marketplace gets large. And so those are like a bit more of a gamble, and you're subsidizing them for a long time, at least until you get there.
Yep.
Right? And the question is like, how do you sequence, how do you choose among these? Is that a good rephrasing?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, so the framework for thinking about this, the first thing to do is like think about it as, in both cases you're subsidizing something, right? Like like subsidizing users by building a lot of really good standalone features, and subsidizing users by giving them discounts to use the platform are both forms of subsidy. And so in all of these cases, it's a question of like, how much is this going to cost me to execute versus like how much value does it actually create for my users and for growing my network. And then, weirdly, like the answer is sort of economically simple, but really hard, but much harder to actually like sort of make practicable. The economically simple intuition is you want the the biggest bang for your buck. You want to like allocate your development resources, your marketing efforts, whatever, to the thing that is the highest return overall, right? Like in terms of like total value creation, maybe weighted towards short-term value creation if you're really new, relative to the cost. So like if it is easier, right? If you control the standalone value features better, and like exactly what your customers want, and you like know that you can build them really well, if that's like heavily in control in the sense that it's low cost and you can execute on it and you're certain it will work, versus something where it's much more unclear, like and the costs are uncertain and probably maybe higher, like you're gonna go after and find 5 marquee users, and you don't really know how much of an impact they're going to have on other people joining the platform, and you're pretty confident that your standalone features are going to bring in X number of users in X way, then you're building your standalone features. If instead, like you find it really easy to like bring in 5 marquee users, like that like some people are like desperate to use your platform irrespective of whether it's like fully built out or not, that's your like cheap option, then you go after them. It's very much about figuring out like how much of an impact each of these different possible interventions will have on your platform in the short and medium and long term. Controlling for defensibility a little bit, right? If you bring in a bunch of marquee users and they might leave tomorrow, that's also like a much less defensible position than if you build features that are very hard to copy, and vice versa. If the features are very easy to copy, but like, your community is forever, then maybe you want to build the community. But it's like, how much value is this thing going to create for the platform? How much is it going to cost me, and how does that ratio compare? Any further questions?
My question is around these marquee users. Like, how do you identify and then track the impact of them?
Great. So, first of all of this is hard, right? Like, and especially, one of the things that's really hard about platform analytics, and that thus carries over, virtually all Web3 businesses are platforms, thus they're virtually all going to have this problem, is that a lot of the impacts are second and third order and downstream and like take a long time to kick in, right? Like having some, having your first 5 users probably doesn't do very much at all in the immediate term, right? And the real question is like, how do those 5 help you get 10 to 20 to 30? And then like you start seeing like the real network effects kick in at 100 or 1,000 or something. So like there's this, whether they're marquee or otherwise, right? It's like, how do you measure like what caused what? Because a lot of these things are not really randomized experiments, right? Like or some other form of like easily identifiable change, right? You're not gonna like systematically. Sorry, actually, by the way, large platforms do systematically like change the exposure of users to other users all the time, right? So like once you have like, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of users, then actually you start running experiments like what happens if I like drop the amount of my content on my platform by 20% and you show half of your users 80% of your content and the other half 100%, and then you're like, wow, like, you know, what's the elasticity with respect to content generation? But like when you have 5 users, not only does that not make any sense, but you certainly aren't going to do it, right? You want everyone to like be enjoying the thing as much as possible. So you want to, first of all, you want to try and like pair all of these interventions with things that are more measurable, right? If you're going to like have a marquee user, you know, you can't split test whether they are or not on the platform, but you could certainly split test how you message their existence on the platform, right? And you can like have events, right? If you're an NFT project that happens to include a few major celebrities, and like it has also a couple of like, you know, major players in the community. And you could design events and check attendance, right? Like, do more people sign up for the thing with the 2 celebrities or the 2 community, you know, sort of, you know, the 2 community leads, or you know, 1 and 1, right? Like, and you create 3 such events, you make them sort of otherwise similar, or you like, you know, just check registrations and signups, right? So there are things that are like split testable, even, you know, at the level of like, you know, we have this one user or, you know, this one like project that we're launching. You can sometimes, by the way, smoke test those even before they happen, right? Like, you know, before someone join, you know, before you like go out of your way to like recruit someone to join the community, you could like go out of your way to recruit them to be at one of your events and like see if that drives a lot more participation. And then if so, go to them and say, hey, can we give you like 5 tokens and like, you know, get you to really be a part of this thing. But at a high level, what you want to be measuring is how your community or your community / user / whatever growth responds to different changes in what you're producing, right? And when those are features, that's actually reasonably easy to test. When it's people, it's harder, but it's not impossible, right? Like, and again, it's like, look at how those people interact. Do those interactions like drive other participation? Look at what they create, see how much those, like often those, you know, people will be creating features for your community, right? Like, you know, they might be like, you know, writing protocol supplements or features and things. And it's like, how much value do those assets create? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, and this is just sort of like it's like a miscellaneous tip. It doesn't come, it doesn't come with a specific tactical execution strategy because it's going to vary from context to context. But the other tip is like, especially your big players, whether they be like, you know, individual celebrities in an NFT project or like major development shops on an L2, they're often going to want to work with you as partners, right? To like think through like what their engagement looks like and like how it gets structured and how it gets built out over time. And all of those opportunities like are likely to be measurable, right? And they're going to want to measure too, right? They're going to understand like, you know, how much impact did we generate doing this thing? And so it's like as much about like watching as you're like building out their engagement with them for things that you can like test and measure along the way, as it is about just like in the high level, like wanting to be metric driven. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so it seems more like split tests and working together with the community.
Yeah, exactly. So the really, yes. And make sure, sorry, and one more thing. Gosh, this is great. We really should do a write-up about this. Or something. This is a really, really interesting and like pretty deep question. And Web3 makes it's one of the only things I'm aware of where like Web3 on the margin probably makes it a little bit easier because like so much is observed and recorded, right? The other thing you want to know is like downstream, it's like, you know, you can like try and predict different counterfactuals, right? Like you can even like just like lock in growth projections and like see how far off you are in different ways. And there are like fancier statistical ways to do this too, right? Where you basically extrapolate like what the community growth would be or like what the expected like user contribution per user would be at a given time and like measure how much that changes after you make a bunch of platform adjustments. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking at sort of like almost like the derivative of the derivative, right? It's like, how much impact do we have on the rate of change of user engagement or something like that sort of from these different interventions?
Gotcha. Yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you.
Cool. Great question. Further questions on competitive advantage? Going once, twice. Got one.
So I think a lot of us are trying to build a competitive advantage because,
Yeah.
especially venture scale investors particularly like them. Um, and
I've heard that.
And there have been some events in the space like Blur's sort of recent growth, and that have, I guess, made me question like which competitive advantages can lead to sort of a long-term moat and which ones might not. And particularly because I'm building a client on top of a social protocol, I get this question a lot as well, like where's
Absolutely.
the moat? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on moats and which ones can be lasting and which ones may be harder to defend.
I don't think I could have generated a better plausible transition to exactly the next topic, which is that. Great. This is literally what we're talking about next. It's like, how do we build defensible competitive advantage in Web3? Background fact is like, when does this even happen sort of strongly in the first place? Like, what makes a market like winner take all or most? We've already talked about network effects. Another one, and this is going to be super critical in thinking about the Web3 case, is how hard it is for users to switch, right? Like that example you just gave of of users switching, from one NFT trading platform to another, that's much, much easier to do on a blockchain-based platform or in many social protocols. And then relatedly, interestingly, and sort of moving in the other direction, right? Markets are more likely to be winner take all when there are fewer niche users, right? When there are few users who have a unique need that can be sort of supported by a niche platform. But this switching cost thing is going to be utterly essential here. Okay, we're gonna do this one really quickly because this is a good thought exercise. We're not gonna have people sort of exposit their answers, but we're gonna think about it. We'll do like a poll. So same thing as before. Are L-star chains winner take all? So layer 1, layer 2, layer 5, whatever. DeFi lending platforms, NFT minting platforms, NFT communities. So same thing. Think to yourself for 30 seconds. Talk to your neighbor for a minute and a half, and then we're just gonna poll and see how many we think is in each one. And then exactly, literally, the next sort of the next course, or the next the wrong word. The next layer, pun not intended, is exactly from how do you go from this understanding of when platforms have marketplace dominance into Web3 platforms and Web3 competition. Cool. But first, are they winner take all? Think to yourself, talk to a neighbor, we'll be back. So just quick show of hands, winner take all. How many are bullish on L-star chains being winner take all? We got a third of the room. So let's just quickly think it through. Strong network effects, very likely. Multi-homing and switching costs, hard to know, right? We're seeing lots of applications just pick up from one L2 and move to another. L1's maybe a little different, right? Maybe that's, there's maybe more likelihood of a fixed L1 substrate. Few users with unique needs. What do we think? Yeah, hard to know. Maybe yes, maybe no, right? You could imagine that one day there will be a finance only, or development, even a development finance, a developing world finance only L1 that is very heavily optimized for that. Just like there are pricing networks focused just on development, developing countries, sort of agriculture networks and stuff. And so totally possible that we might have even proliferation of L1s. Also possible that the network effects might be so strong that all of that stuff centralizes and happens and onto a single L1 with multiple layers. I think it's one of the hardest, biggest open questions right now for predicting the blockchain future. DeFi lending platforms, winner take all? Yes, no. How many yes? How many no? How many I don't know, that was do they all add up? Roughly add up. Probably depends a lot on how sticky that liquidity is. Right? And those switching costs, right? Yield farming is taking advantage of low switching costs, but switching costs might get higher over time as liquidity becomes more different. I don't know, hard to know. NFT minting platforms, how many yes? No. Yeah, a lot of votes for no here, right? We already see a couple of different NFT minting platforms, accumulating large market shares. worth thinking about, is that because the platform itself doesn't have particularly high network effects, like switching costs near zero for the user at least? Worth thinking about, like, is there a way to give it stronger network effects, right? Is it just a service, or is there some way you can turn this platform into a network? All right, NFT communities, winner take all, at least within the category of, you know, some category like the anime NFT community or whatever. How many yes? How many no? Yeah, a lot of no's. People have lots of aspects to their identity. Switching costs, multi-homing, very easy, right? Like I don't know about you guys, I'm in the maximum number of Discord that Discord allows. This is all looking like kind of hard, right? This is like reframing David's question, right? Like this is looking a lot harder. So Web3 platforms store all their data and protocols on public chains, you know, or you know, at least partially public chains, and they're controlled by users. Users have all that data. It's portable, it's interoperable. These are the features. These are the things that make it so easy for so many people to build on top of a protocol. But they also mean your users can walk out the door, right? They make this competitive advantage problem much harder, right? Think how much easier it is, you know, if you're on, you know, if you're on Manifold, like Manifold is an interface for minting, minting contracts in effect. And sort of managing, you know, sort of all of the data and infrastructure around that. But it's different from Redbubble in that, you know, at Manifold, you own your own contract at the end of the day, right? You create a Manifold contract and then you have control of it. In Redbubble, you upload like all of your art and stuff, and like they'll put it on like, you know, mugs and t-shirts and so forth. I don't know if you got, Redbubble is like it's sort of like an Etsy, but you upload art, like imagery, and they then print it on stuff, you know, sort of, but you know, if you want to take that and like move it to Cafe Press, you actually have to like go and do the upload again, right? You don't own the assets. Redbubble does. Much harder. Same with, you know, OpenSea versus Etsy accounts. And I claim that this is not so much about decentralization, but rather about the fact that all the architecture is like on these blockchains, right? It's really about the public data and the user control of that data and that content. So like, you know, as David pointed out, this is like much harder from a competitive standpoint, right? There's this like threat of fork, there's the possibility of vampire attacks. Fork is just like, you know, people like copy your protocol and re-implement it under their own control. Vampire attack is a platform using on-chain data to identify competitors and recruit them and directly incentivize them to switch. That's what we've seen happen in a variety of digital asset trading contexts, both fungible and non-fungible tokens. You know, the easy way to remember this is that you know, we have our goblins shouting "when fork," holding up a spoon, of course, and our vampires, you know, sort of shouting out. Like, what's really happening? Again, like going back to like classic market frameworks. Michael Porter introduced what are called the 5 forces. You know, sort of competitive advantage, you know, sort of lives in this framework of, you know, 5 forces that shape competition. And here, I mean, this is like just a classic diagram. The version here is like a CC0 one that's used in Wikipedia. Industry rivalry. So the existing competitors sort of like, you know, compete and erode away each other's competitive advantages potentially. As do the entry of substitutes. So like, you know, alternate products that can do the same thing, you know, or replace the need for whatever you do, and new entrants who do the same thing that you do, right? So like, you know, NFT minting tech, there could be a new entrant who operates their own like NFT like minting platform, or there could just be like new ways to like produce digital assets that like replace NFTs. Both of those like can erode your competitive advantage. And then bargaining power of buyers and suppliers, same thing, right? Like this is about the vampire attacks. This is like, are your users like sort of, you know, is there a way for your users just to walk away that gives them much higher bargaining power with you, right? Why are we seeing intense price competition, you know, on these NFT platform fees? Well, it's because the users are price sensitive and it's very easy for them to move from place to place. And so that like raises their bargaining power and pushes down price. Footnote, by the way, a common misconception about this NFT price competition and royalty competition as well is that the only direction it makes sense for this competition to go in is to like lower price across the board. But you have to remember the creators are customers too. right? And so one of the things that strikes me as very out of equilibrium about the current NFT competition, and one of my colleagues, Michael Blau, will be talking about royalties tomorrow, is that somehow the bargaining power of the customer, like the user rather, the buyer, has gone up. But also, when individual creators can choose platforms and vote with their feet and decide which, whether they're going to post on their website, buy on OpenSea or buy on X2Y2 or whatever, or buy on our private, sort of marketplace exchange, as many NFT collections do, they have some bargaining power that's increased as well. That means that prices, maybe go down facing pressure from the buyer, they go up facing pressure from the creator. Who's getting squeezed in that context? It's the platform in the center, right? You've got to provide lower prices to your buyer and higher royalties or revenue to your creators. And so, there's a lot of pressure, right? Lower switching costs, same thing, on both the buyer and seller side. Threat of new entrants potentially much higher because a new platform can just come in and leverage the existing network of information and assets. Threat of substitutes and or fork, right? You don't have to just worry about substitute products from outside, but you can someone can substitute your product with your product. It's a little bit of a gain because you can create embeddedness, or you can incentivize your buyers and suppliers by giving them tokens, right? So there's a little bit of we're not totally doomed here, but seriously, what are we doing here? Right? It sounds kind of awful, right? Why are we in Web3? So remember, all of that story is sort of a static story, right? That's in economics, we talk about general equilibrium effects, and we use that term to mean a lot of things at once. The general equilibrium is if I change, consumption patterns in the United States, how does that affect people's incentive to build factories in other countries and stuff? That's a general equilibrium effect. And another general equilibrium effect is suppose I change the way, what's happening today, right? I pay all my workers more today. They get more productive, they maybe invest more and produce more over time because they're happier and sort of have fewer sick days. Actually, getting better health insurance is an easier example. I improve my workers' healthcare today. They're now healthier, their families are healthier, there's less chaos in their lives. Over time, they probably become a little bit more productive. And over time, they become slightly more productive means I can lower prices to customers, anchor customers more effectively, and in the end, sell more products. That's a general equilibrium effect too. It's sort of a long run downstream consequence or outstream, across companies or across time and space consequence of a decision I make today. All of these concerns about, the Web3 problem being so much harder are against the backdrop of it potentially providing this opportunity to produce so much more value, right? One key is that you don't have to capture as much of it if you're producing twice or 20 times as much, right? But you still have to capture some of it. And a footnote, by the way. So remember, the one saving grace on that sort of 5 forces change slide was this green in the upper corner, right, and lower corner. This idea of tokens and embeddedness as a way of driving sort of competitive advantage. They're also what drives the value proposition of Web3. This idea that people are going to invest in building out and helping support your platform. And so there's this positive self-reinforcement between these two effects, right? The same thing that makes you more embedded as a platform and ties your user base more closely to you and aligns their incentives with yours is the thing that drives those users to create value, right? It's aligned incentives is both what keeps the users there and what drives them to help make the pie bigger. Okay, so here were all of our competitive advantages from before. David pointed out, a lot of these get worse, right? These network effect competitive advantages often get weaker thanks to vampire attacks and potentially fork. economies of scale, like, a little bit unclear what this does for like sort of basically feature economies of scale, but certainly things that are like network knowledge and know-how, they're just like out there, and anyone who like can process the blockchain data can sort of compete on those. Standalone value, technical advantages. We talked earlier, this question about whether like you should build like sort of the things in your control or not first. The things that are in your control are often more defensible, especially early on in a Web3 environment, right? Like, if if you have some users who are locked into your product because they really like using your product, that may be more defensible. Multi-homing costs, as we said, these are a disaster. These are much worse. Embeddedness gets better, right? Once you have composability. And so, one thing we can learn from this slide alone is that like if your protocol is like easily embedded, or your community can become embedded in many things, leverage that opportunity, right? Like that's that if anything has become a stronger source of competitive advantage while a lot of these others are under threat. But the other thing that's really important here, and that is sort of new, as I said, to Web3, is this idea of community cohesion. And here, like this is the real answer to the question about what's the defensibility of a social protocol. If your users are creating content on your protocol rather than some other one, and that protocol is the one that everyone wants to create content on, then all the value that other people build on top of it, right? Even if like other platforms are like giving rewards to people who have high status on your platform, it drives people to participate in your platform particularly. Perhaps an easier metaphor. So I'm friends with the team at Forum 3. In fact, I'm co-authoring a book with Steve Kaczynski. This is the group that designed the new Starbucks Odyssey rewards program. And they came to speak in my MBA course in January. And one of the students asked this incredibly astute question, which was, look, I'm confused. Like Starbucks rewards used to be private in an app and only Starbucks could see them. Now you're putting them in on this online platform and like, anyone who wants can see them on the blockchain. What happens if Dunkin' Donuts starts airdropping discount coupons to Starbucks reward holders? And the team from Forum 3 gave this incredible answer, which was, if that's what happens, then it becomes all the more important to be a Starbucks rewards member, right? Like if Dunkin' Donuts starts like, delivering extra value to regular Starbucks users and consumers, right? Both, we get more value from like, having people will want to be Starbucks, rewards members because they get like, benefits of this coffee company that isn't even related, right? Like, it's like if you go to Dunkin' Donuts a lot, you get Dunkin' rewards. If you go to Starbucks a lot, you get Starbucks rewards and Dunkin' rewards. That seems better. And on top of that, the Starbucks rewards program is specifically geared towards like teaching people about coffee, teaching people about like what Starbucks does, and like reinforcing their brand value and the cohesion of their user community and their excitement about Starbucks, right? It teaches them like all sorts of stuff they didn't know about like why Starbucks coffee is interesting and cool, and like how Starbucks works with farmers, and like, different opportunities for, they give their staff and whatever. Like, and so there's this dual feature of like, all the composability stuff, all the things people build on top of the Starbucks reward or on top of a given social protocol drives some value to that reward or protocol system. And the way you design your protocol is also about getting the community to like really agree and like feel value of being part of this protocol, like using this, like contributing to this product, rather than all the others, right? If you've invested in building new applets or like a new viewer for, for a given, like, for Farcaster or whatever, right? Like you built an app for Farcaster, like you are a Farcaster expert, you are in some sense a Farcaster maxi, right? That's what makes you want to stay. You're invested in that ecosystem, and like the more people who become invested in that ecosystem, the more they stay. And this is a really powerful source of competitive advantage that Web3 brings to the table. And I think we just haven't seen it before, right? Like who self-identifies as like, I'm super stoked to be a Facebook user? Like, again, apologies to like Facebook users or former Facebook employees or whatever in the room. Like I was a very, very, very early Facebook user. And fun thing is back then, actually, I did self-identify. It was really exciting. Like you felt like you were like helping build this product. now it's kind of a utility, right? It's like, it's like I'm a Facebook user. I also like, use an email platform and use electricity in my, my apartment or whatever. So this community thing, Web3 makes it possible to build that, sustain it, and really make it a source of true value. We are almost done, I promise. There's a lightning round with 2 other key points, and then we're going to wrap. Key point 1, in light of everything we've just seen, what's the point of tokens? We just said it. Tokens are about incentivizing users to make high quality contributions. And why do they incentivize users to make high quality contributions? It's because they internalize some of the gains, right? It means that if you manage to grow the pie from 1 slice to 3 slices in my really silly emoji slide, sort of font, then you get like an extra half slice or something of the sort. It supports that community cohesion network effect by like driving individuals and groups to invest in building it. And again, that improves your value capture opportunity, right? The irony here is the thing that makes the community more valuable also makes value capture easier. And again, it's that like, Web3 grows the pie to give everyone a bigger slice in the end sort of value statement that is the sort of core opportunity here, in my view. Sidebar, this only works if you've designed the tokens correctly. I know Eddie talked about this, and you'll probably have some other sessions about it. You only get the benefits of shared ownership if token incentives are aligned properly. Goes to the point earlier about getting the tokens to the people who really want to be part of the community. Also means the tokens have to reward the value creating activities rather than sort of like nonsense or whatever. And again, this is one of the most common mistakes I see is that people launch tokens as a way of giving their community members like a liquidation opportunity. Right? Like you don't want to do that. You want your value to stay in the ecosystem. You don't want people to sort of like just keep mining it, until they're able to cash out. And this often means that like you want your token to accrue later, or like or become liquid later, right? Like it's about enabling people to like build the community and like be sort of so engaged in the product that they actually want to keep the value in the system and keep using the product rather than just like immediately exit, right? If you're designing a game world and like everyone is playing the game and then one day you're like, oh, hey, like, by the way, you can like sell all your game assets, and then everyone takes the game assets and sells them, your game is over, right? So you don't want people to really be able to like sell a bunch of their game assets, at least not for like large amounts of money, until they'd much rather just keep playing the game, right? Your game wants to be fun enough, before you give out the like super rare, or you got to give it to a very small number of people, right? If you give a tiny number of people like something super rare, hopefully they just feel distinguished enough that they're like, it's mine. Otherwise, like, maybe they sell those super rare things, but it's a very small amount of liquidity drain. You don't want like people to like be liquidating until they have, most of them are so invested in your platform they'd rather not, which is a really unusual like sort of thing to think about in this context. But in like, classic entrepreneurship, we do it all the time, right? Like why does equity have a vesting period, right? Like you want people to like invest over time before you give them the opportunity to liquidate. Second lightning round point, role of decentralization. Like, why is this here? Why do we like decentralization is great. We're like in favor of it, but like also lots of like early crypto is about people decentralizing things that didn't have a direct reason to decentralize. Fun fact, I was on record as a major crypto skeptic for precisely this reason. I was like hearing pitch after pitch of like, we're going to decentralize X, where like X was like pretty efficiently provided in a centralized way, and decentralizing it was going to be absurdly hard. I was just like, no, like, why would you do this? Like, but there are real benefits to decentralization. And where do they come from? Again, think about competitive advantage. They come from quality and performance improvements, right? Lower cost or higher quality as a source of differentiation. They come from incentives. There's a fantastic student on the economics job market this year, Marco Reuter, who has this paper where he really shows a very nice, elegant argument that giving your users governance tokens can serve as a credible commitment device that you're not going to like raise fees on them dramatically down the line because they get a governance vote in fees. And that means that more platforms join more users join your platform, more platforms join your user. That would be interesting. More users join your platform in the first place. And that means your platform can be bigger. And again, you literally, it's an economic theory model of this, like, growing the pie effect. And where does it come from? It comes from being able to make a credible commitment to your users that you're going to make decisions that are in their interest. There are also legal benefits to decentralization. I know you're going to hear from Miles a little bit later. And then in terms of competitive advantage, over and over again, we've been saying all day today, right? Like, decentralization is, like with tokens, is about getting more users invested in your platform's success, right? If like more people are part of it, and especially like people who can contribute, they're going to contribute because they share a piece of the pie. I feel like I've said that 27 times, but I can't say it enough. Footnote on decentralization. It's also really hard to do, and it can be very costly, especially if you're like in your early stages of your startup and you're trying to like move fast. So first of all, not everything has to be decentralized. And second of all, not everything has to be decentralized at the beginning, right? You want to think about which features of which decentralized features are going to give me these benefits. Like what can I get performance improvements out of by decentralizing? Content curation, yes. Developing like core platform infrastructure at the start, probably no. Developing core platform infrastructure 5 years in, very much possibly. And so you can like decentralize over time the components that want to be decentralized. In a different article, Jad and I talked about this idea of like a decentralization equalizer. Like sort of progressive decentralization is, you turn your product into like minimum decentralizable units. There's like content curation, core infrastructure, finance, like all these different components, and think about them as a bunch of sliders. And they don't all have to slide together, right? You can like have a very decentralized like, content, strategy while the entire platform is being developed centrally, at least for a while. And like, that can often be like a very effective way to develop, right? Like, you have people like curating content, which is hard for you to do centrally yourself. Whereas like, you're doing fast iterations on the platform. And even if your goal is for the whole thing to be fully decentralized down the line, like you might flip the content curation switch much faster than you flip the, sort of the source code switch, source code decentralization switch. And lots of Web3 platforms do that. And it's not an accident. So you don't have to go from 0 to 100 all at once, and you don't have to do all the dimensions all at once. You can pick your dimension, decentralize, and do them sort of in scale. Hopefully, ideally, if you design it right, like you're only moving forwards rather than backwards. But like the main point is that like, these are separate, like, and mostly sort of disjoint verticals that you decentralize as you go. All right. So competitive advantage in Web3 in no particular order. We've seen a bunch of different components of it. First and foremost, community cohesion. These are otherwise in no particular order. But incentive alignment, embeddedness, and decentralization, these are all things that if you get right early, right? You think about decentralization is actually a really interesting one. Like that is a source of competitive advantage. If something is hard to decentralize and you manage to make it work, that can often be much more defensible because everyone joins your platform, right? Like you've decentralized to all of your users. A new platform has to figure out how to operate in this same decentralized way and recruit all of those users. It's sort of like a doubly difficult problem. So if you figure out how to make your operations more effectively decentralizable earlier, maybe that's defensible because then you build up this user community, right? I guess it's clear from that contextual example, but like to reinforce, these competitive advantages are not independent. They are interdependent with each other. Better incentive alignment leads to more community cohesion. More community cohesion often drives embeddedness and vice versa. But so these are like, my pullouts for competitive advantages in Web3 as you're thinking about like, where can we really differentiate ourselves? And then just to wrap, like what's the TLDR? Value capture in Web3 is, I would say, like, at least on the margin, harder than in Web 2, right? There's like more competitive pressure and, you're sharing your pie, right? So like, not only do you have to like beat the competitive pressure, but you have to like, give up some of the pie as you go. But there's this potential to make the pie dramatically bigger. And, smaller share could still be a bigger slice. And the lessons, sort of like, a lot of the history of this in open source software is sort of like, think about like Unix and its like complete proliferation in all of the servers in the universe, right? Like there's a slight oversimplification. I'm not an expert on Unix proliferation. There's a ton of it. And there are tons of people who built it and embedded it in many, many things. And like, why does that work? It's because everyone can like share a bit of the value that accrues to it. And Web3 just makes that much more explicit and gives you as the platform architect a more direct way to shape that, right? To like give, we talked earlier, this question about like, what do you give it as a reward that's like not dollars? Well, you give people like characters in your story universe, or like, governance of your platform architecture or whatever. Like it gives you this fine-grained way to deliver value that is perfectly aligned with what you're trying to build and what actions you want the users to take. And so you have this like incredibly, it's not just like, they also get some of the benefit of the software, right? It's like you can target the way you're incentivizing your users to what you actually want the output to be. But all this together means that like you really have to think carefully about that. Like the strategic decisions are more essential and often harder than they were back in the day. QED, thank you for bearing with 2+ change full hours of business strategy discussion. Great questions throughout, fantastic contributions and comments. I really appreciate it. And I'll be happy to take more questions or see you later in this afternoon.
That was great. Thank you. Oftentimes
Thanks.
I see platforms kind of like confuse their product market fit with people who are just in it for their tokens. How do you find the balance as a platform before launching a token, trying to find product market fit, incentivizing product market fit with the token? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, super hard. And it varies a lot by context. So one thing that I recommend, actually very much like the idea for the NFT project, again, apologies, I didn't get the name, but for the NFT project, like one thing you could do is if you know where to find the right type of users and like recruit them as your core, that's one strategy, right? So like a lot of times when I'm advising Web3 projects that in one fashion or another, like have a user type that's repeatable. Like, I use way too many NFT examples, but I am a total degen, right? Like if you're an anime NFT project, like, trying to compose manga, you should like go and find the other anime NFT projects that are doing the same thing and figure out like who those users are and like try and bring them in or something of the sort. Similarly, like, if you're building a team that, sort of a community of people who are going to like write various like reputation signal algorithms and like aggregate them into meta reputation signals or something, right? You're looking for people who are, respected developers, and like, your initial community is your initial community formation is like you try and curate very hard. But then this question of like, how do you avoid this like sort of like liquidity outflow? A bunch of things you can do. First of all, one thing is you can just delay. Right, so like a very simple strategy, like with vesting of equity options or something, right, is you can just like, have a slow release, right? If you if you are bringing in like, core dev contributors, like maybe their tokens vest over time, or maybe they vest immediately, but they take a long time to become tradable. Another, and you can do this at the level of the entire system, right? Like, sometimes like when I talk to crypto gaming companies, like I suggest that they should basically have all of the token be an internal point system that only lives in their game for a long time initially, like months, maybe even a year or two. And then at some point, like say, look, okay, we've gone from, we have this game environment, like with this internal currency and an internal scoring system or whatever, and reputation system, we're now suddenly going to like open it up to the outside chain. The, this liquidity event comes, sort of once most people, like once the game ecosystem has its own, sort of internal network effect, and like a lot of people are playing because they want to be there. And even if you lose some of those like early users, who really built up stores, new people are there and still actively playing. And again, remember, if there's like these lockups or delays, there's much less value as the initial user to, building, if you're just there to like, cash out, it's just going to take you a very long time. Right, like it's sort of, and with any luck, like the people who are just there to be extractive, just stay away. Right, they go and choose something, something else to do with their time. The other thing, I guess, is that like, I've talked about it as if there's this sort of like binary of like people who are there to extract and people who are there to contribute, but that's not really true, right? Like, there are people who might even arrive intending to extract and then discover they like the thing and stay or something of the sort. And so you can also shape behavior and you can give people some degree of reputation that's non-transferable. So like, actually, another article I'm citing my Jad is a frequent collaborator. He's super brilliant. One of the best students I've ever taught. We've written a bunch together. We wrote a piece on reputation systems. And part of the argument there is that there should be a platform-specific reputation that's non-transferable that accrues to the individual user as a function of their platform contributions. And then maybe you later introduce like a fungible token that's something that like liquidifies that, but you can control its accrual. Right? Sort of like people build up a localized reputation, which is permanent and only valuable in this platform. And then like later you can say, okay, look, we're going to like start like, releasing tokens or something that you can then like start trading. But like you control the distribution of those and you maybe award it to the people who had the higher reputation, but at some rate that is like consistent with the, sort of with the scale of the ecosystem. And those reputation accrual points, like the things that are like the core point of value here, doesn't have an outside use. And so again, people like have less of an incentive to build it up just for the sake of like being able to get that like downstream sort of like, later reward. It's much more useful and valuable to you, especially in the near term, if you want to keep using the platform.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Hey, thanks. This is great.
Thank you.
A number of us are building more like B2B applications to like, serve the Web3 ecosystem and on top of some of these protocols. Do you view that as more of a Web 2 type of strategy or a Web 3? Like, are there,
Could you give an example so I can contextualize a little bit what you mean? Because my guess they probably span the spectrum from like more Web 2, like Web 2, Web 2.5, all the way to like Web 3 or Web 7 or whatever. So give me an example or two, please.
Yeah, like as a B2B application, then we might not. Well, we'll never launch a token. We're not building a decentralized protocol. There's centralized elements and some we may decentralize. And so you lose out on some like the community aspects, the like incentive alignment. And so should we think about it more in a traditional business strategy, or are there elements of like Web3 strategies that we should be looking to incorporate?
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. I totally grokked the question now, I think. So first of all, remember, just alone, if you're a service, even if you're a Web 2 service provider providing services to Web 3, you're dealing with a lot of these architecture challenges that the purely Web 3 platforms face as well, right? Like, stupid examples include like, if you optimize only for one blockchain and then like everyone decides they're switching chains or something, like, they're going to be able to switch frictionlessly, which means that if you have face a lot of friction in switching along with them, you might be in trouble, right? Like, or, if you're providing a service that later a tokenized player enters into, you're going to have to think about like, do you have sustainable competitive advantage versus someone who can directly incentivize them to switch, even if they don't precisely know, maybe not all of your data is on chain, but some of it probably is, because like whatever they're doing is getting stored on chain. And so you're facing a lot of the same strategic challenges, even if you're just building entirely in like a sort of like classic Web 2 platform frame. But I also think like, even if you're purely, it's funny, like, I teach it, the other course I teach at HBS is about marketplace businesses. And we talk a lot about B2C and C2C marketplaces because there are just sort of like many more examples the students are familiar with. But then we like sort of phase into this B2B marketplace discussion. And the funny thing about B2B marketplaces is they're not nearly as different from consumer marketplaces as you might think in terms of architecture. The differences are often in like the fact like the customers are like of non-trivial size and often like require like new tooling and so forth. Hopefully this is resonating, by the way. I've never actually built a B2B marketplace myself, but like this, like there's a lot more similarities in terms of the way you think about like platform growth and scaling and network effects. But like, instead of having like, every customer sort of being like, tiny, like, sort of you can run experiments on 40 or whatever, like each contract, especially at the beginning, could be like, 10% of your entire business or something like that. They're these much larger players. And so you're, for example, much more worried about losing them. It's harder to experiment. But fundamentally, like the strategic architecture questions tend to be the same. And and particularly if you're thinking like, I'm going to have this customer who is like a big discrete player, I would be wondering like, what do I do, what do I do to make it the case that all of these like large customers who themselves are sort of on this periphery of like much harder competitive set do to like feel that they want to embed and like sort of like permanently use my technology or my service. And probably the way to do that in a Web3 universe is to like try and commit, sort of design in a way that makes them more embedded also, right? You're like, you're sort of like adjoint to the Web3 network effect building, even if you yourself are like just building a service. Like it's like your service has got to be the thing that makes their network effects and like their community cohesion stronger, which may in fact require in and of itself like more Web3 sort of strategic thinking in your context. I don't know if that was a good answer. I'd love to talk about it more offline and like learn more about the specific products you're building, because like this is actually like a question that's pretty new. I don't feel like I like actually know the answer in full detail because I don't yet have a good enough concept of like how that layer works.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Also, hopefully, was that like approximately useful?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome, great.
Hi there. I have a question around how much time it takes to build those defensible moats, and if like because of community decentralization, those are kind of like hard to get versus like network effects and like speed. Asking because if the value capture is hard, but the idea is the pie is gonna be much bigger, does that mean it's gonna grow much faster or just gonna be bigger long term, and we have to just get ready to like?
Great. Oh, such a good question. Probably should. It's a great question. Should like draw this chart or something. So first of all, the strength and growth rate of network effects always depends on the context, right? So, the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but that's not a useful answer. So let's think about like what actually differentiates. So many Web3 platforms, by nature of the way their incentive schemes work, actually like can grow faster, right? Like, and we've seen this, right? Like these platforms pop up very quickly because they're promising like sort of some direct reward to early users, and like maybe that reward accrues in the long future downstream, but that's okay, right? Like the point of the early incentive alignment is the users start trying to help you grow the pie as quickly as possible. And so in that sense, I think there's an opportunity for this stuff to accrue faster than in classical frames. But there is this risk, right? Also that like when the reward is downstream, maybe people like don't feel it as acutely, right? Like, if the carrot is that, you get the carrot, some sort of carrot and some sort of carrot metaphor, right? Like you have this carrot hanging like, out there to grab. And if it like, moves like, carrot gets bigger, but it moves like, a mile away. Now it looks really tiny and you can't see it, right? And so that's why we end up in these, it's often why we see these like models of sort of like, first of all, like embedded partners initially, right? Like why you have like, sort of core devs or whoever who you subsidize, even if they're actually not part of your organization per se, as a way of like, jumpstarting the flywheel. And then some mixture of like early rewards and late rewards with an attempt to like, again, as much as possible, align the users, right? Like, find the people who have the longest time horizon and get them like sort of on board and invested. So I think like in some sense, like with the right calibration, these network effects can accrue faster, but the calibration problem is hard, and there's not a like general, there's at least not yet. Maybe this, have to think if there's like a good theory framework for this, but I don't know of a good framework for like calibrating that with certainty. Sort of like how to decide, like how do you balance like downstream rewards with rewards today? But like you need some mixture of the two, and you want to be like aiming for people who are willing to contribute a lot. Sounds nice, right? People contribute a lot today in exchange for a reward like a far off time in the future. But that's kind of right? Like the more people are willing to contribute today, the closer those rewards move because the faster the network effects grow. Yeah. And so like if you find the people who like understand that and like really invest in growing the thing today, then the carrot comes closer and everybody wins.
Okay, thank you.
I guess we just turned it into like carrot cake instead of the pie, but whatever.
Yeah, I agree. My intuition is they will grow faster. It's just we didn't find yet like the frameworks to do that efficiently.
Super interesting. Same thing. Let's like all of these questions honestly today. I'd love to talk more about offline. That's a really interesting. Like it would be really interesting to try and characterize precisely what you need to do to make that work. Like how the relationship between the elasticity of user participation and like different reward structures drive the speed of network accrual, because you've got these sort of two derivatives working together. It's so interesting. That's probably an economic theory paper. We should probably write it. Sorry, go ahead.
I love that. Hi, Scott. I have a philosophical question. I've thought a lot about forking in particular and whether that is a value prop that you could sell to a community or a set of users. I do think it's a very values-aligned value proposition, but tactically the question I've been coming up on over the course of many years is, when you really think about it, has there ever been a successful fork that has truly kind of credibly challenged the protocol it forked off of for dominance? I can only think of one example, but I'm curious if you've thought about this a bit.
I guess it's hard to think of very large platform examples, but I think for like smaller communities, it happens a lot, right? You might have like, everybody, sort of like everybody in one community go and move to a different one with really similar like purpose or aesthetics, but that's just different, right? Like, or you might imagine, it's hard to think of very large instances where this has happened, but like, I don't know. You have you have protocols like switch platforms, like you have games like switch from like one L2 to another, or you have like, user communities just like basically like fire their founder and like move and sort of restart something with like similar image assets and similar aesthetics. And in my mind, like those are forks as well. And there's like another version which is like the copy protocol at embed, right? Like I wonder whether one source of pressure on like DeFi platforms from like against raising fees is the possibility that somebody else might like literally just like release a copy or like embed that copy into their next wave of their software instead of using the existing platform as a component. And so like, I think first of all, the fact that we don't see tons of forks doesn't mean that like they're not still disciplining behavior, right? Like it's the case that like the threat of fork is something that like disciplines fees and disciplines governance, and like, but also like I think it's not surprising that like larger platforms, we see fewer of these, right? Because they have stronger network effects and have often grown in ways that have this discipline feature. So there's less incentive for people to want to leave. Whereas like we see forks much more in like early protocols as they start out, like people are like, no, never mind. I don't like this, or I don't like the founder's attitude or whatever. And then they just go and create a new thing that's very similar, which is just like a different type of fork.
Yeah, super helpful.
Does that help?
That helps, yeah. The example that I've thought about over the years is Steam to Hive. But outside of that,
yes,
right? Like
nice.
that feels like a credible fork. But outside of that,
that's like a class. You're right. That is a really good example of like a classical fork.
Exactly.
And like, I have trouble thinking of other classical ones at that scale. You're totally right. But again, for better or for worse, and it's true, right? Like, so the how hard is it to fork affects like the extent to which a fork actually does discipline, right? Like, the fact that we see very few could be because everyone's happy, or because like actually network effects are too strong and forking is hard. And so it's important for forking to some degree to like be feasible in order to get us into that other equilibrium.
Hey Scott, thanks so much for the talk. That was fascinating. I have a question about kind of product development. So do you think it's smarter to prioritize the needs and requirements of some of the marquee customers in the present market state, independent of what you believe the future may be? Or is it better to sprint as fast as possible to future state because some of those problems may not exist?
Oh, wow. That is such a great question. You will get differences of opinion on this. My answer to this, everything else, pretty much everything else I've said, although some of it like borders opinion, everything else like sort of feels like theory to me. This is an opinion. I think the best sustainable platforms are built with an eye to the future. I think like that fundamentally like building a platform, building a marketplace is about changing user behavior. And in order to like end up in a positive like value creating equilibrium for everyone, it has to be that your long run state is one in which like, you know, the equilibrium is really good, right? It has to be that like, you know, you aim for a future that is like value creating for everybody. And like, you know, this like decentralization as a way of disciplining fees is like a perfect example of that. It's like, why would you decentralize your platform today? You're giving up a lot of pie. Well, the reason is that like if users feel more comfortable joining, then like you can later like be at much larger scale, right? Like, you know, fee commitments today means we can be, you know, low fee commitments today means we can be bigger in the long run. Similarly, in terms of like how you architect your platform, I mean, there are boundaries, of course, right? Like if you're building for an ecosystem that doesn't exist at all, like, you know, you're not gonna be able to get started. But like, there's a lot of pressure to be short term, to be short term, especially in crypto, where like so much of the building is done in public. Right? There's a lot of pressure from people that you should like build in this like, you know, very like you know, today me, like, you know, I want, you know, all now focused way. But like actually like the more of that that's going on, the more important it is that you actually like have to have this long run view, in my opinion. So you will get differences of opinion on this, but that's how I feel.
So it sounds like you may be saying, I mean, obviously there's some nuance here, but if you can achieve the speed toward future state, that is more optimal than trying to achieve some type of strategic position based on the requirements of users today.
Correct. But that is opinion. And like, I really don't think there's a clear answer to this question.
Sounds good, thank you.
Hi, Scott. Really like your talk. Thanks for all the details and strategy. And this is Ling Long from Blockcast. We are building a Web3 gaming platform. So
cool.
You mentioned that the benefits of building Web3 is all this like community, cohesion, and incentivize embeddedness, all this stuff. So as we see that right now, there's a lot of like open source projects that already have this like community network effect. Developers are passionate about building on top of it. I think the only thing, the difference of building like the kind of the open source platform compared to like a protocol, decentralized protocol in Web3 way, is a token that can provide the financial incentivization. And with the current sensitive legal environment, and then the suggestion of building a reputation system, right? And then with that, what will be the essential difference between building that kind of like open source platform that people can build in, contribute, and having like a app store kind of marketplace compared to this Web3 of like building a protocol and everyone can build on that on top of it?
Great. Okay, first of all, so like, again, reiterating the comment from much earlier, like I don't think that's the only way in which you can share ownership and incentive alignment with your users, right? Like it's not just about, you know, sort of like a gold token or whatever that one can extract. Like, you know, you can give your early users like really cool avatars that are like unique and maybe like, or like extra tokens to use, you know, sort of like internal tokens, things that are used inside the game universe or something. And so I think, first of all, like thinking creatively about like, how can I deliver value in a way that isn't sort of just, you know, purely about being able to liquidate helps to some degree there. But then this question of like, do you want an app store? Do you want like a, you know, very open universe? Like, I think the open universe is powerful because it enables people to build stuff that you would never have imagined. And it's also risky because it enables people to build stuff that you would never have imagined, right? Like maybe they're going to build like a whole separate game that like uses your game assets, right? If you have like, really cool like avatars, maybe they're going to like, take your avatars to space or something. And like, note that if they do that, all that value accrues to your avatars, right? If someone else builds, like that's actually like sort of a weirdly great state of the world. If someone builds an awesome game that like also uses your game elements, like that's super cool. And like inviting them in to like do that, and by making it sort of as open to architecture as possible, can be really valuable. But indeed, you know, it also means you have to build everything much more carefully, right? Like, you know, you and you know, it means people can build things that might, you know, bring risk to your ecosystem. Whereas an app store is more locked down, right? You can decide here's what goes in. You can like pick your partners very clearly. But again, I mean, I think like the real key is that like many successful, you know, to the extent that we've seen successful Web3 games so far, I think a lot of them start in a frame that is sort of like a Web2 game, but like with an open architecture that then people start constructing on. Like maybe they'll build their own bots to like play the game more effectively for them or something. Like, and I think like, therefore, like this tension you're setting up maybe isn't like quite as like binary as the question frames it as, right? That basically like you want to be building a fun game for your users, and you want to give them the opportunity to like take those assets and like do other high value stuff with them inside the game or in other worlds. Like, you know, bring it, you know, bring the avatar from your game into some third party game, and then it becomes an advertisement for you. Like, I think the point of the interoperability is giving people the opportunity to like build around it and to you know, invent new ways to build around it and accrue some of the value from doing so. My guess is you're going to turn more and more of that on over time, but also people's desire to do it is going to, you know, sort of increase over time, right? Like it's, you know, unless your avatars are like really, really ridiculously cool, people aren't going to take them to space until they've already decided they like your game. Is that helpful? I sort of, yeah. I did the professor, like, you know, escape of like, you know, answer, you know, rephrasing the question into a different question and answering that instead, which I'm not sure whether it counts.
Yeah, makes sense. But I guess there's might be some like IP related question as a follow-up, but we can talk in person.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. Always great to talk about business models and pricing. I have one potentially very risky comment. So I want to preface this by saying that it's asked with an open mind and curiosity, but as an entrepreneur throughout your talk, it really struck me that the language that you used to describe crypto and business models in Web3 really struck me, like with a lot of give, share, subsidize. And yeah. I think it's a theme overall, like in the B2B side of the business. We're building a consumer brand utilizing crypto, and you've already answered some of the questions around what do you think are the end user benefits to opting into Web3 as opposed to a Web2 transaction into a brand, and how we can grow brands through that. I wonder if you feel that centering positioning this entire discipline around the fact that you're giving up, you're subsidizing actually can slow down or not make the application of crypto as sort of aggressive as a traditional business could be if it was contextualized in a pure economic benefit to the end user.
Wow. That is an incredible question. I don't have time, you know, we don't have time to go, like we could probably talk about this for half an hour. Yeah, sorry. I'll try and be very quick, but this is so good. I want to say something. I want to like really try and like do it the question a little bit of justice. First of all, something that struck me in the question is this idea of like giving up. You know, this use of language of like giving up is even just like a little different from the language of like gaining, right? Like Web 2 was like it is still a world of like very extractive platforms, many of them. And so, you know, just thinking about like the way I teach this stuff, right? Like it's in contrast to an equilibrium. You know, Web3 is in contrast to an equilibrium where like most of the game was about building a network effect so strong that it enabled you to extract. But when I talk to brands, I think about it somewhat differently, right? Like my co-author Steve Kaczynski says that like in Web3 you were the customer, in Web2 you were the product, and in Web3 you are the brand, right? Like a crypto-based brand is very much like about making everyone sort of like the incentive alignment is manifest and thought of as like making everyone a part of the same thing, right? Like you all have the same shared purpose, and like this grows the value. Like just like if you have, Bobby Hundreds is incredible about this, right? Like, he was one of the earliest people in, sort of to, in classical branding to realize that like, attachment to a brand icon like transcends format, transcends type, right? Like, the Atom Bomb Squad collection is about like giving people a sense of like being a part of the aegis that is the Hundreds. And in that case, the framing is less about sharing than it is about like creating something greater than like any individual part could have been alone, right? It's not like there was an entity called the Hundreds that now is like the Hundreds has like carved itself up into a bunch of pieces and given some of itself out to everybody, but rather the Hundreds always was the clothing brand and its community of people. And now like people have like it can make that sort of complete and bidirectional. Like the people are now part of the brand. And that makes the Hundreds like just like a greater, like bigger thing. So it occurs to me that like framing this in reference to Web2 platforms, like you have this idea, like it feels very like almost adversarial, like it's a shift of like an adversarial shift or something. But like that's actually not necessarily like the way you want to have it in your heart, right? Like what it really is like we are all building a thing together that is greater. And in that model, the contrast, like, it feels both a little bit less, I don't know, like, it feels less oppositional to like what has come before. And it also feels like, potentially more powerful, right? Like when if you think about it in relation to, as you say, like, why would you ever want to like build in this way? It's like, well, like, because you build something greater in the end. And like that, and that's that same statement, like the platform has more users, it becomes more effective, it has more features. But like, when we all build the platform together, we can actually like, the platform is more than its individual parts, and we add it up over we integrate it over a larger set anyway. Anyhow, those were my miscellaneous reflections off of your extraordinary question. I hope that was like relatively responsive rather than just musing, but great question, and I'd love to chat more about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott.
QED.